There comes a point when you have to stop making excuses for what his words supposedly mean and start paying attention to what they actually reveal. Doing that can save you from years of emotional pain, unanswered questions, and relationships that slowly drain your confidence. What you're about to understand has the power to break the cycle of justifying behavior that keeps you stuck while making it harder to recognize what genuine love truly feels like. After spending more than 16 years working closely with thousands of women from different parts of the world, I've seen the same psychological patterns repeat themselves again and again. Smart, capable, successful women often become trapped in relationships that quietly consume their self-worth. There are 4 specific phrases that don't simply hint at a man's intentions. They expose the strategy behind how he plans to keep you emotionally invested, enjoy the benefits of your presence, and eventually walk away if he believes someone else is a better option. These phrases are far more dangerous than ordinary red flags because they rarely sound harmful. Instead, they are often disguised as honesty, emotional openness, or mature thinking. That's exactly why they work so well. The moment these words leave his mouth, it's important to realize you are probably not dealing with someone who is simply uncertain or taking his time to figure things out. More often, you're dealing with someone who has already decided not to offer you genuine commitment, yet still sees value in keeping you close. He enjoys your attention, emotional support, validation, companionship, and even intimacy, while quietly leaving the door open for someone he believes fits his ideal future. Don't rush ahead because the 4th phrase is the one that catches almost everyone off guard. Society has wrapped it in romantic advice and presented it as something comforting, so much so that most women actually feel reassured when they hear it. Yet it has quietly contributed to more broken hearts, lost opportunities, and wasted years than all the others combined. Before we uncover these 4 phrases that should immediately make you think twice, there's something much deeper you need to understand because it changes the way you see every relationship from this moment forward. Many women grow up believing that love means endless patience, constant understanding, and always searching for someone's hidden potential instead of accepting the reality standing in front of them today. Movies, family influences, friends, and popular culture have repeated this message so often that it feels like unquestionable truth. We've been taught that if we become supportive enough, loving enough, forgiving enough, and patient enough, we can inspire a man to become the partner we've always hoped for. The belief is that eventually he'll recognize our value, appreciate everything we've done, and finally choose to commit wholeheartedly. The problem is that this way of thinking makes it incredibly difficult to separate sincere growth from empty promises. When someone is genuinely working to become a better partner, their actions consistently support their words. But someone who wants to keep you waiting only needs to say enough to maintain your hope while avoiding real commitment. Over time, this conditioning convinces many women that expecting consistency, respect, and clarity somehow makes them demanding or impatient. In reality, those standards are not obstacles to love at all. They are what protect healthy love from becoming emotional confusion. Timeless wisdom has always reminded us that meaningful relationships can only be built where appreciation and mutual commitment exist. Yet modern dating often sends the opposite message, convincing people that protecting their hearts is selfish and that healthy boundaries will drive away the right person, when in truth, those boundaries are often what reveal who was never truly committed in the first place. There is something most people never tell you about the phrases we're about to discuss. They usually aren't innocent mistakes or examples of poor communication. In many cases, they're subtle ways of finding out how much you'll overlook, how much disappointment you'll accept, and how often you'll put your own needs aside to make life easier for him. Someone who regularly relies on these phrases has often discovered that they create confusion while encouraging the other person to lower their expectations and keep giving more. That's why it's so important to recognize them for what they are, instead of automatically assuming they come from fear or uncertainty. This isn't simply about becoming better at dating, It's about protecting your emotional well-being and your future. The partner you choose influences nearly every part of your life, from your confidence and peace of mind to your friendships, career, finances, family, and the way you value yourself. Choosing someone who never intended to meet you with genuine commitment can leave you spending years repairing damage that never should have happened, while your own goals slowly fade into the background. The first phrase that should immediately make you stop and seriously reconsider the relationship is when a man responds to conversations about commitment, exclusivity, or taking the relationship to the next level by saying, "Just give me time." On the surface, it sounds calm, thoughtful, and completely reasonable. That's exactly why it's so effective. It creates the impression that he's simply asking for patience, when in reality, it can become a way of keeping everything exactly as it is while avoiding any real responsibility. Instead of offering clarity, he asks you to pause your expectations indefinitely. Instead of moving forward together, he asks you to remain emotionally available while he decides what he wants. Over time, you may begin believing that asking for commitment is somehow unfair, when the truth is that wanting honesty and direction is one of the most natural desires in any serious relationship. What often happens beneath the surface is much more revealing. He may already know that he isn't ready to fully invest in you, yet he also doesn't want to lose the comfort, attention, emotional support, physical closeness, or validation you provide. Saying, "Give me time," allows him to keep receiving the benefits of the relationship while delaying the conversation that would require him to make a genuine decision. Little by little, your completely reasonable needs begin to feel like personal flaws. You start wondering whether asking where the relationship is going makes you impatient. You question whether wanting security makes you needy. You convince yourself that expecting consistency is somehow asking for too much. Before long, you begin changing your behavior to become easier, quieter, and less demanding, believing that if you simply need less, everything will eventually work itself out. The hidden cost of this dynamic is enormous because it slowly teaches you to abandon yourself. You're expected to invest your loyalty, your emotions, your time, and often your exclusivity, while receiving none of the certainty that normally comes with a committed partnership. You begin acting like you're fully committed, while he keeps every option available to himself. You continue showing understanding, patience, and emotional generosity, even though very little is changing in return. The hardest part is that this keeps you trapped between hope and uncertainty. Every day you wonder if today will finally be different. You analyze every conversation, searching for signs that he's becoming more serious. You become so focused on protecting his comfort that your own needs gradually disappear from the relationship. That isn't the feeling of secure love. It's the exhausting cycle of emotional uncertainty, and the longer it continues, the easier it becomes to forget what it feels like to be chosen clearly, valued consistently, and loved without having to earn your place every single day. The second phrase that should instantly make you pause is when a man says, "I'm just being honest with you," immediately after saying something unnecessarily harsh, dismissive, or hurtful. At first, those words can sound mature and respectable, because honesty is something we all value. But honesty should never become an excuse for disrespect. When someone uses that phrase to defend comments that damage your confidence or ignore your feelings, they aren't showing emotional maturity. They're trying to avoid responsibility for the impact of their words. Instead of acknowledging that what they said caused pain, they shift the focus onto your reaction. Suddenly, you're made to feel like you're the problem for being hurt, while they position themselves as the brave person who's simply telling the truth. That's what makes this phrase so deceptive. It disguises a lack of empathy as authenticity and encourages you to question your own perfectly reasonable emotional response. The reason this tactic is so effective is because many people have been taught that blunt honesty is always admirable, regardless of how it's delivered. But genuine honesty doesn't require humiliation, insults, or emotional carelessness. Someone who truly respects you can communicate difficult truths while still protecting your dignity. They understand that kindness and honesty are not opposites, they belong together. A man who repeatedly hides behind the words, "I'm just being honest," is often revealing that expressing himself matters more to him than considering how his words affect the person he claims to care about. Over time, this creates a dangerous pattern. You begin believing that feeling hurt means you're too sensitive. You start convincing yourself that asking for compassion makes you emotionally weak. Eventually, you stop speaking up altogether because you've accepted the false idea that your pain is something you simply need to tolerate instead of something that deserves understanding and respect. The long-term damage goes far beyond a few painful conversations. When this pattern continues, it slowly disconnects you from your own instincts. Your emotions exist for a reason. They alert you when something feels unsafe, unfair, or unhealthy. They help you recognize when your boundaries are being crossed and when your needs are being ignored. But once someone repeatedly teaches you that your feelings are the real issue instead of their behavior, you begin doubting your own judgment. You silence your intuition before it even has the chance to protect you. Healthy partners don't use truth as a weapon or empathy as an optional extra. They know difficult conversations can be honest without being cruel. They choose words that build understanding rather than tearing down the person standing in front of them. Real emotional maturity isn't measured by how blunt someone can be. It's measured by whether they can speak honestly while still making the other person feel respected, heard, and emotionally safe. The third phrase that should immediately raise every warning signal is when a man responds to your concerns by saying, "You knew what this was." You'll often hear these words after expressing disappointment about how you're being treated or after asking where the relationship is heading. Rather than addressing your concerns, he uses that sentence to make it seem as though you've lost the right to expect anything more. It's a subtle way of convincing you that because he never promised commitment at the beginning, you should simply accept whatever treatment follows, no matter how painful or disappointing it becomes. Instead of recognizing that relationships naturally evolve as emotional investment grows, he acts as though the original circumstances permanently erase your ability to ask for greater respect, consistency, or commitment. The message beneath those words is clear. Your changing needs don't matter because he believes his original position excuses every future action. That mindset reveals far more than the sentence itself. It suggests he views relationships as fixed agreements where one person gets to remain emotionally unavailable while the other quietly accepts whatever is offered. He expects you to continue investing your time, energy, affection, and loyalty while believing you have no right to ask for growth or deeper commitment. But healthy relationships don't operate that way. As trust develops and two people become more connected, it's completely natural for expectations, conversations, and emotional needs to grow as well. Wanting clarity doesn't make you unreasonable, and hoping for progress doesn't make you demanding. When someone dismisses those desires with, "You knew what this was," they're avoiding accountability by placing the entire burden on you. Rather than acknowledging your experience, they try to convince you that your disappointment is somehow your own fault. A caring partner listens when your needs change, even if the conversation is difficult. Someone who values the relationship doesn't use the past as an excuse to ignore the present. What makes the phrase, "you knew what this was," so emotionally destructive is that it slowly erodes your confidence in your own reality. You begin replaying every conversation, every affectionate moment, and every sign of closeness, wondering if you imagined all of it. You question whether the connection was ever real or whether you somehow misunderstood everything from the beginning. You start believing that expecting someone who spends their time with you, shares emotional intimacy, and behaves like a committed partner to actually become one is somehow irrational. That's exactly how this phrase shifts the balance of power. Instead of discussing what has genuinely developed between you, he encourages you to distrust your own experiences and accept his version of events as the only truth that matters. When someone repeatedly convinces you that your understanding of the relationship relationship is wrong while dismissing your feelings, they aren't creating clarity. They're creating confusion, and confusion is one of the most effective tools for keeping someone emotionally dependent and uncertain. What this response ultimately reveals is the way he views your growing emotional investment. Instead of appreciating your openness, your trust, and your willingness to build something meaningful, he treats those qualities as something he can benefit from without offering the same level of commitment in return. As your feelings deepen, he doesn't see them as a natural progression of the relationship. Instead, he frames them as evidence that you're asking for too much or trying to change an agreement that only ever benefited him. The reality is very different. As two people spend more time together, become emotionally vulnerable, and build intimacy, it's completely healthy for expectations to evolve alongside that closeness. Wanting clarity, consistency, and commitment after investing your heart, your time, your loyalty, and your energy isn't unreasonable. Those are ordinary human needs, not impossible demands. But he's relying on you to believe otherwise, because the more guilty you feel for wanting something real, the easier it becomes for him to continue receiving everything while giving almost nothing in return. The saddest consequence of accepting this mindset is that the relationship becomes frozen in the version that serves him best, even though every other part of the connection continues moving forward. Your emotional investment grows stronger, your attachment becomes deeper. You sacrifice more of your time, your peace of mind, and your future, yet you're constantly reminded that you're not allowed to expect anything greater than what was offered at the beginning. The imbalance becomes so familiar that you stop questioning it. You continue giving love, understanding, patience, and loyalty while convincing yourself that asking for reciprocity would somehow be unfair. That's exactly how unequal relationships survive. One person keeps investing more while the other keeps redefining why nothing should ever change. Healthy relationships don't require one person to permanently silence their needs simply because the other person refuses to grow alongside the connection. The fourth, and perhaps the most dangerous phrase, sounds compassionate on the surface, which is exactly why so many people overlook it. It usually begins with words like, "I don't want to hurt you," or "I don't want to lead you on," only to be followed by behavior that does precisely those things. It feels considerate because it sounds like a warning given out of care, but often it's something very different. Rather than protecting you from future pain, it can become a way of protecting himself from future accountability. By announcing his intentions in advance, he creates the impression that any hurt you experience later is simply something you accepted. Instead of changing the behavior that will cause the damage, he keeps moving forward exactly as planned while believing that the warning itself somehow excuses the outcome. That's why these words deserve far more attention than they usually receive. Behind those statements is often an uncomfortable reality. He may already know that he doesn't see a lasting future with you, but he also doesn't want to lose the comfort, affection, emotional support, physical closeness, or validation that you bring into his life. Rather than stepping away honestly, he keeps you nearby while making sure the arrangement remains entirely on his terms. Because he announced that he didn't want to hurt you, he expects to avoid responsibility when his actions eventually do. The psychological effect of this is powerful. You begin feeling as though you have something to prove. You convince yourself that being calm, patient, and accepting shows emotional strength. You try to become the woman who never asks for reassurance, never requests commitment, and never makes anyone uncomfortable by expressing her own needs. Instead of honoring your desire for security, you suppress it, believing that asking for clarity would somehow make you less mature. The truth is much simpler than the confusion this phrase creates. People who genuinely care about protecting your heart don't knowingly continue down a path they believe will cause unnecessary pain. If someone recognizes that they cannot offer the relationship you deserve, the compassionate choice is to step away instead of continuing to receive the benefits of your love while preparing for an eventual exit. When someone repeatedly says they don't want to hurt you but continues making choices that predictably will, the warning doesn't erase the responsibility. In many ways, it only highlights that they understood the consequences all along. The most painful part is that this shifts the entire burden onto you. When the relationship ends, you're left believing you have no right to feel betrayed because at least they were honest. Meanwhile, they walk away believing they owe you nothing because they gave you advance notice. But genuine honesty isn't simply announcing that harm may come. Real honesty is allowing your actions to match your words. When someone knowingly continues a situation that benefits them while expecting you to absorb all the emotional cost, that's not compassion, maturity, or integrity. It's a decision to prioritize their own comfort over your well-being. And recognizing that difference can save you from investing years in someone who never intended to protect your heart in the first place. Now that you've heard these 4 phrases and understand the patterns behind them, you may be feeling a mixture of emotions. Maybe you're angry because you recognize them from your own experiences. Maybe you're hurt because they remind you of a relationship that left lasting scars. Or perhaps you finally feel relieved because something that never quite made sense has suddenly become clear. Whatever you're feeling, that awareness is valuable. Sometimes the hardest part of moving forward is simply finding the language to describe what you've been living through. This isn't about teaching you to distrust everyone or believe that healthy relationships don't exist. It's about helping you recognize behaviors that repeatedly lead to disappointment so you can stop questioning yourself. When you understand these patterns, you become far less likely to mistake confusion for love or uncertainty for emotional depth. Clarity doesn't make you cynical, it gives you the freedom to choose relationships that genuinely support your happiness instead of slowly diminishing it. It's equally important to remember that not every man communicates this way. There are people who don't rely on confusion, mixed signals, or emotional games because they understand that love should create peace rather than uncertainty. They don't see your openness as something to take advantage of. They appreciate your trust and respond by becoming trustworthy themselves. When difficult conversations arise, they don't hide behind excuses or clever phrases. They communicate honestly while still protecting your dignity because your emotional safety matters to them. They don't leave you wondering where you stand or expecting you to earn basic commitment through endless patience. Instead, they choose you clearly, show up consistently, and understand that healthy relationships require effort from both people. Those relationships absolutely exist. But it's incredibly difficult to recognize them if you're still spending your energy explaining away behavior that continually leaves you feeling anxious, unimportant, or emotionally exhausted. As you move forward, start paying closer attention to the quiet signals your instincts send before your mind begins making excuses. If something consistently feels off during the early stages of getting to know someone, don't ignore that feeling simply because you hope things will improve later. Notice whether you're constantly explaining away comments that hurt you, rationalizing behavior that leaves you confused, or convincing yourself that someone didn't really mean what they clearly said. Pay attention if you find yourself becoming quieter, hiding your feelings, avoiding difficult conversations, or lowering standards that once mattered deeply to you just to preserve the relationship. Those changes are not signs that you're becoming more loving or understanding. More often, they're signs that you're slowly disconnecting from yourself in order to keep someone else comfortable. Healthy love never requires you to abandon your identity just to remain accepted. Above all, remember this: you are not responsible for repairing people who repeatedly choose to hurt you. You are not required to convince someone to recognize your value or teach them how to love you with respect. And you do not owe your future to anyone who continually asks you to shrink yourself while they remain exactly the same. Your responsibility is to honor your own needs, trust your judgment, protect your peace, and build a life that reflects your true worth. The relationship you're hoping for becomes possible when you stop settling for relationships that demand less of you than you're capable of giving. It finds you when you stop performing a smaller, quieter, easier version of yourself simply to keep someone interested. The right person won't require endless proof that you're worthy of commitment because they'll already recognize your value from the way you show up authentically every single day. So the next time you hear one of these phrases, don't dismiss it or immediately search for a more comforting explanation. Remember what you've learned here. Every extra day spent with someone who repeatedly relies on these patterns is time taken away from the future you're trying to build. Every excuse you make for behavior that hurts you teaches your mind that accepting less is somehow normal. Every night you lie awake wondering where you stand slowly convinces you that confusion is simply part of love. But it isn't. Healthy love brings clarity instead of constant uncertainty. Genuine commitment creates security instead of endless waiting. Real care doesn't make you feel guilty for having ordinary human needs or leave you questioning your own reality. Perhaps the hardest part of leaving isn't saying goodbye to the person standing in front of you. It's letting go of the future you imagined, the potential you believed existed, and the version of them you hoped they would someday become. That grief is real, but holding on to an imagined future will never replace the reality of how someone consistently chooses to treat you today. When you finally accept that truth, you create space for the kind of love that never asks you to earn what should have been freely given all along.